Welcome to the Therapeutic Food Solutions podcast. I'm your host, Marian Mitchell. I'm an integrative nutrition health coach, therapeutic diet expert, and founder of The Road to Living Whole. There are many different diets out there. It's hard to know which one is right for you with your chronic illness and autoimmune disease. In this podcast, I'm going to share with you the foundational pieces every single therapeutic diet out there shares, and also how to use the best one for your particular diagnosis. If you've been looking for a meal planning partner, help navigating the complicated healthcare system, and want to feel better quickly, I'm your girl. Grab your kombucha and notebook. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I have joining me for the fifth time Dr. Michael Biamonte, and I am excited to have a conversation with him again, to dive into some of the newest research he is getting into with fatty acids and their impact on our health. So I am super excited to dive in today. Dr. Biamonte, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
So for people who are maybe new to the podcast or haven't listened to our previous episodes, can you give us a brief intro to who you are and what you do?
I'm a naturopathic doctor, and I specialize in handling infectious disease issues like chronic viral problems and candidiasis and parasites and things like that. But I also have a very broad background in clinical nutrition. And recently, I've been doing a lot of studying in the field of fatty acids, essential fatty acids known as EFAs. We have a test that we've been using which measures them in people very easily, just with a prick of the finger to get a drop of blood. And it's startling. Originally I was interested in the test because essential fatty acids help your body transport calcium and utilize calcium. And we use hair testing a lot. So in the hair tests, we typically see people who have very low calcium or very high calcium. And we found that both cases have problems with fatty acids, because in the case, the more interesting case is the person who has very high calcium in their hair, which is an indication of non-utilization. So as your body's unable to utilize calcium, it starts to build up and deposit in your soft tissues. It deposits in your arteries and your circulatory system, which is how people develop arterial sclerosis, which when I was a kid, they used to call it hardening of the arteries.
Right.
And we know that that condition is responsible for high blood pressure and lots of problems. You also can develop kidney stones when you have these issues, because again, anything that causes you not to use calcium correctly and causes it essentially to drop out of solution in your system, it just starts to store and build up. And some people have referred to this as the calcium shell, which I find an interesting way to look at it, because it is true, because internally you're developing a shell of calcium that's affecting your circulatory system and all your soft tissues. And the role of these fatty acids are to transport this calcium so that this doesn't happen. In the case of the person with the very low calcium in their hair, they are not consuming enough calcium and these fatty acids for them to be transported and then used by their system. So that's an absolute deficiency. When the calcium is very high in your body, we would call it a relative deficiency, because even though it's high in your system, you still can't use it. It's still not available to your body. So it's still deficient, but it's a different type of deficiency. It's a deficiency where you have a lot of it, but you can't use it, as opposed to just not having enough in the first place.
So that's absolutely fascinating. I'm super, super excited to dive into this. I think we need to do a couple of things. We need to define what essential fatty acids are. And then I had one other thing and I just lost it. But
Okay.
how about we do, yeah, let's define those really quick.
Well, essential fatty acids are fats that are commonly found in food, in vegetables, in nuts, seeds, and meat. And they're responsible for a lot of critical functions in your body. One of the most interesting is they make up the integrity of a cell membrane. So without essential fatty acids, your cells basically collapse. They ensure proper flexibility of the cells and fluidity, I would say, of the cells. And they're kind of almost like cholesterol. Cholesterol is sort of a neighboring substance to an essential fatty acid. Cholesterol is kind of like the cement that keeps a cell together. And you could think of the essential fatty acid as, well, it's not a protein. It would be if you had plaster and you were making a wall, the essential fatty acid might be the water that you're mixing the
Mm,
plaster in.
yeah.
That could be a way to look at it.
So when I think of essential fatty acid, I think of omega-3, like fatty fish oil, but I think of the omegas, the omega
Mhm.
families. But saying that they're in plants and in vegetables and in other meats, are you talking about omega-3 specifically, or are there other types of essential fatty acids?
There's probably about 16 or more
Okay.
types. In some ways, it boils down to some very simple ones, which the
Okay.
ones that you find constantly showing up as issues. There's arachidonic acid,
Mm-hmm.
which arachidonic acid is more typically found in, I'm going to say, bad foods,
Right.
supermarket meat. I'll make that differentiation between supermarket meat versus grass-fed, hormone-free, etc.
Mm-hmm.
The arachidonic acid is very inflammatory. And when someone has high levels of arachidonic acid, they're going to have inflammation problems. And they may not be looking at that as the real cause of it. They can get, because when someone has inflammation, you tend to look at all these different issues. And sometimes it's just as simple as elevated arachidonic acid when it gets overlooked because people don't consider these things.
Yeah.
The opposition to arachidonic acid is well, there's a few. The main one would be DHA.
Mm-hmm.
And DHA is let's say, a good fatty acid that would oppose arachidonic acid. And then when you start breaking them down further, you find there's one called linolenic acid,
Mm-hmm.
which is very, very important, very therapeutic. It helps basically, it helps a lot of your body tissues heal in addition to performing different functions.
Right.
Hormone production is a big issue with essential fatty acids. Hormone
Mm-hmm.
production, controlling blood pressure, blood clotting, immune response. There are so many functions they have, and they get overlooked. And now that I'm on this side of the aisle, having studied these guys and looked at them therapeutically and measured them, I'm dumbfounded as to why people have not really in the nutrition field paid more attention to them.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I think a lot of it is the information that's available, how to find that information. Like I said, when I think of essential fatty acids, I think mostly of omega-3s. And what I think is interesting and what you brought up is like there's inflammatory fats or fatty acids and anti-inflammatory. And, the inflammatory, do they contribute to what we were talking about earlier with the calcium? And maybe inhibiting that process, or is it truly just a deficiency, like they're over consuming ultra processed foods that are high in inflammatory fatty acids, under consuming the essential fatty acids, and so that's when things are getting thrown off?
Yes, that there are specific ones though that deal with calcium. As I said, there's probably 16 to 18 if we wanted to list them. There are specific ones that do deal with calcium, but when there is inflammation in the body, calcium tends, well, we all know that calcium and magnesium work together.
Right.
And one of the functions of magnesium is to keep calcium solubilized in your system so it doesn't drop out of solution and then cause this calcium shell. But
Mm-hmm.
when there's inflammation in your body, that just is a natural process that happens.
Right.
The magnesium's not able to hold the calcium soluble. So
Mm-hmm.
there are steps to how all this happens. There's multiple steps to how it all goes down, which is really interesting. That's what's fascinating about it.
Yeah.
So when you test the person and you isolate all the bad fatty acids they have and then the good ones that they have, and you see which of the good they don't have enough of to neutralize the bad ones, this is where it becomes really interesting in terms of their genetics.
Mm-hmm.
Because I believe a lot of this, some of it is dietary. Like if you get a person who's eating the standard American diet with a lot of fast food, they're getting a lot of inflammatory fats. But when you see somebody who's doing well with their diet and their lifestyle, then you see the genetic part of it coming in,
Right.
and you'll see like in the person who has a lot of the pro-inflammatory fatty acids, which tend to cause rheumatoid arthritis, you see that you'll start asking them about their history and their parents, their grandparents, and then you start finding out that in their family there's a tendency towards some of the same illnesses that they have. So you then have to conclude that those people had the same fatty acid balance.
Hmm. Interesting. I think what I am loving about the research that is going into nutrition science right now is diet plays a huge role, but genetics do too. And I find that knowing the genetic weaknesses that people have, we're able to kind of balance those out pretty easily once we know what we're working with. Do you find that to be true in your case?
Yeah, it's true. It's getting to be entertaining to me
Yeah.
looking at this because what we have found is that the same people who have SOD2 as a SNP
Hmm.
also tend to have these inflammatory fatty acids, but you wouldn't think of them together. Like SOD2 is involved in rheumatoid arthritis.
Hmm.
Superoxide dismutase is the enzyme that SOD2 is involved with. And when you have that SOD2 SNP, you're more prone towards rheumatoid arthritis. And those same people, disrelated, seem to be more prone to some of these pro-inflammatory fatty acids that cause inflammatory conditions that um, you would ascribe to RA, rheumatoid arthritis.
Hmm.
But I can't really say, well, what's the genetic? I don't know what the connection is between SOD2 and those fatty acids. Maybe I haven't bumped into it yet or studied it yet, or maybe it doesn't necessarily exist. I don't
Right.
know. Because there's another group of people who will say, if you're looking more at Oriental medicine, they would look at these things in terms of also personality,
Right.
like a homeopath would, a
Hmm.
traditional homeopath. And the person who's involved in that type of medicine will say, well, if the person tends to be angry all the time, that's the type of person who develops arthritis. And
Hmm.
the anger, and they'll explain how the emotion is causing that physiology to occur. So I mean, there's so many, it's so interesting because there's so many different ways or angles to look at, but just isolating these building blocks of this, it answers a lot of questions we didn't have before because when you deal with the hair mineral test and
Hmm.
you're looking at these calcium levels, what you're looking at goes way beyond what it sounds like right now. The the labs that do this, in actual fact, are looking at your nervous system dominance.
Hmm.
They've worked out different ratios of different minerals that show us whether or not a person's more parasympathetic dominated or sympathetic dominated. And
Interesting.
and the fatty acids, so the key ratio is calcium to phosphorus. And
Hmm.
if your calcium to phosphorus ratio starts to go above 2.5, you're more parasympathetic dominated. So what would that mean? A person who's parasympathetic dominated, first of all, they don't handle fat well. They don't digest fat well. They don't burn it very easily. If you study these people on the organic acid test, you'll see that they don't burn fats very well as energy. They are more carbohydrate burners.
Hmm.
Okay. And being parasympathetic dominant, there's a whole list of attributes that they tend to have. They tend not to be very aggressive people. They tend to develop a pear-shaped body because of their hormone distribution. They're more dominated by insulin and by estrogens and a little bit less by certain adrenal and thyroid hormones. And estrogen and insulin tend to deposit fat more on the lower part of your body, which then give you that more of that pear-shaped.
Hmm.
And the reverse of this is the person who's sympathetic dominated, where the calcium phosphorus ratio drops below 2.5. And here's the person who is barrel chested. Like from the waist down, they could look really skinny. But then when you see them from the waist up, they're big. They look like Babe Ruth. If you look at Babe Ruth was the poster child for being the sympathetic dominant, going back even to his personality and how he lived. They
Hmm.
tend to be gregarious. They tend to have high blood pressure. They tend to be very type A type personality, very outgoing, very boisterous, very loud, and they're horribly carbohydrate intolerant. They
Yeah.
have insulin resistance and metabolic dysfunction was this is their where they're at. if they can't tolerate carbohydrates, when they eat carbs, they store it for fat very quickly. They do really good eating a diet that's high in fat and protein. So they're more of your carnivore
Right.
people as far as what the diet needs. And
Oh,
so,
it's so interesting because you think about like people who are like, well, that didn't work for me and eating this way does. And then they're like, but they feel guilty almost for
yeah, yeah,
following that
yeah,
diet, but like
yeah.
that's where they thrive. It's so interesting.
So if you take this basic of is the person parasympathetic or sympathetic dominant, you're going to start to see that the parasympathetic is the one who tends to low thyroid. And what's happening with their thyroid is not what you would think. What these people tend towards a lower body temperature because in the metabolism of your thyroid hormone, calcium and potassium and zinc and copper regulate the receptor sites for thyroid hormone. So in your
Hmm.
liver and in your kidneys, you have these receptor sites where the thyroid hormone is supposed to hit and then do its job. Now, if the balance of calcium to potassium and zinc to copper is off, if they're calcium and copper dominated and the zinc and potassium are low, it downregulates the thyroid hormone. And that's what you find in your typical parasympathetic. And a lot of these people are on thyroid medication. Some of them have out and out diagnosed hypothyroidism, but there's a large percentage of them who their blood work doesn't show really that they're hypothyroid per that criteria. Their
Right.
thyroid hormones may be normal or maybe on the low end of normal, but they have every symptom of hypothyroidism.
Hmm.
And they may even be on thyroid medication, which helps them, but never seems to get them where they want to be. And that's
Right.
because they're dealing with this um, tissue, trace mineral, cellular receptor imbalance that their doctors don't know even exists because there aren't that many doctors who have studied this who know about this phenomena.
Right. Well, one of the things that I've learned, I've started working with a lot more doctors who are MDs that are transitioning to functional medicine. That's kind of something that I'm seeing a lot of right now, and I'm interacting with a lot. And they are not even aware of the tests available. They don't know what labs are available for them to join, and then even how to interpret the labs if they do. And yeah, but they're eager and they want to learn.
That's good.
They know there's something more there, but they're just they're new. They're learning, right?
Right.
And so I love that we're talking about this because, a lot of my audience is those with chronic illness, but also those who treat chronic illness. And so, this is quite fascinating. Here in
Let me
Arizona.
put in a plug.
Yeah, yeah,
I'll
yeah.
put in a plug for Trace Elements Incorporated, which is the lab that we use to do the hair analysis.
Uh-huh.
And their owner and the head of research, Dr. David L. Watts, who's now semi-retired, but he wrote the book on all of this. His
Okay.
and actually he actually has a book. Speaking of that, his book is called Trace Elements by
Mm-hmm.
David L. Watts, and he outlines all of this in the book. He
I will
explains
say I
exactly
tried,
this.
you've brought that book up before and I cannot find it
Amazon.
online.
No, it's on
Are you sure?
Amazon.
Because when
Yeah.
I looked, it was like $110.
Oh, yeah,
Um,
that was it though.
yeah, maybe it just kind of was like in between releases or something.
That could be.
Uh,
That's the
um,
book.
that's the book. Okay.
Hmm.
Because I've been wanting to, it's not been on my list for a while, so that reminds me to take a look again. That's awesome. Thank you for that research. The other
Sure.
one that's popular here in Arizona specifically is called Vibrant Labs.
Hmm. I know
And
them.
yeah, and so, that's another one that I think is a good tool in the toolbox. They also have doctors on staff who help doctors interpret the labs and kind of teach them how to read them.
Hmm.
So that's another one that I'm a big fan of. That is really interesting because, like, it's so, I work with clients and I have clients in mind for each of those categories. And I'm like,
Good.
huh. And I'm a big fan of micronutrient testing. I think
So one thing
where,
you need to be careful with when it comes to the medical doctors are very oriented toward blood work, which
yeah.
is fine. But when you're dealing with the hair tests,
Hmm.
they're totally different. And you're
Right.
going to run into protests and confusion because the doctor is going to expect the hair test to align with the blood test. and it's not possible for that to do that. They're testing two different things.
Right.
Like blood is a medium of transportation in your body. Your blood's job is to transport nutrients and transport chemicals around in your system so that they're accessible to different tissues, glands, and organs. Hair shows you storage. So we constantly hear the doctor say, well, this level of copper in this guy's blood doesn't match the level in his hair, so therefore the hair must be wrong. No, the hair is showing you storage, the blood is showing you the transportation of that copper.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just the one caveat I'll throw in there to be aware of is you're going to get that. They're going to be
Well,
confused. And very
yeah,
often it's exactly the opposite. When the blood level's low, it's high in the hair because the body's taking it out of the blood to store it in the hair.
right. Well, and I think, it's not just doctors, but patients who are getting a bunch of tests run in a bunch of different places. They hear about something and they go and get it done. And patients are also have been trained by their doctors to expect the blood work and the hair to match. And when things are off, they don't know what to do with that information. There's a lot of people who, because the allopathic model has failed them and they struggle with lifestyle changes and things like that in the holistic world. And then they're just tired of feeling bad. So they're just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks, basically. So they're getting all
Mhm,
these tests done. They're spending thousands of dollars on every test under the sun, right? But they don't, where the confusion is understanding what is for what. And I think you did a really good job of explaining that. I think that's really, really helpful. And also highlights why working with a knowledgeable professional is a really good idea, not trying to
mhm,
self-diagnose,
mhm.
because there's a lot of nuance, and understanding what different labs are looking for is a really necessary component of the healing process. But I also think that what I find a lot is people overcomplicate the healing process and the lifestyle part of it. Like you were talking about, the different diets and with the different sympathetic versus parasympathetic and the frustration that comes with that. So, if we're thinking about this in a very practical way, what are some steps that the layperson can take if they're like, this is resounding, like this is something I want to look into, and I want to maybe start effectively supporting my body, how would they go about, what are some steps that they could take to get there?
I guess the first thing would be to get tested and see what they are, because the confusion gets massive. You get the person whose next door neighbor becomes a vegetarian and it changes their life and they're doing fantastic. They lose weight easily, all their problems go away, and that person tries it and he gets worse.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why? The vegetarian is a parasympathetic dominant who's leaning more towards being a vegetarian. And then if they're a blood type A, that throws it totally over the goal line.
Right.
And this fellow over here is a sympathetic dominant who's a blood type O. So you can combine both these sciences, the blood type science, and then this metabolic typing using the hair test to see if you're parasympathetic or sympathetic. First thing you'd want to know is, are you parasympathetic or sympathetic? Then you want to know your blood type to see how that aligns with that. Because if you're a sympathetic dominant and you're a blood type O, it's almost like you could say you're like an Eskimo in that way, where you're really a carnivore and a fat eater,
Uh-huh.
as opposed to the person who's like in the tropics, who's a blood type A and a parasympathetic dominant who's really more towards a vegetarian.
Yeah.
So this immediately eliminates all that horrible confusion that occurs. And
Right.
why is it, this person tries a diet and then you get practitioners. I've been seeing this my whole career, is you'll have these practitioners who they'll stumble on something and they'll start doing a diet or some kind of program and it works phenomenal on them and they build a whole career on that. But they
Yep.
make the mistake of thinking this is now what everybody should do. So they come
Yeah.
across this fellow who's the total opposite of what they're doing. And they're trying to convince this guy this is what you should do. And then the guy tries it and it's horrible for him. And
Yeah.
then of course he's bad, he did it wrong or something like that, as opposed to scientifically and not being right. So when we look at and say, what is man's ideal diet? Well, man's ideal diet, there is no ideal diet for all people.
Right.
Everybody is biochemically individual. It goes back to Roger Williams. Everyone is biologically and chemically different. People have to find the diet that's right for them. But
Yep.
the smart way to do it is through testing because the data does exist. It's just that the data is not out there. Not everybody knows this. This should be
Yeah.
taught in kindergarten to kids.
Yeah.
And then they
I
go through
completely
life
agree.
doing it. Yeah, really. If it
Yeah. For me as a health coach and practical application, like if somebody is, okay, I'm going to start getting tested, I want to figure this out. Like I always say, the first step is just starting switching away from ultra processed food and eating a more real food diet.
right,
That is like the big thing. That removes like 80% of it right there, right?
and
You're
that
because you're
helps.
you're getting all the
Right,
micronutrients, you're getting
right.
the protein, the amino acids, minimizing the inflammatory fats, you're maximizing the anti-inflammatory essential fatty acids and all of that. So it's like for me, like a lot of times just switching to a real food diet and mastering that. And then from there, it's just kind of tweaking. And that's where testing can really help because if changing your diet only gets you a little bit of the way there, but not all of the way there, that's when I think testing can be, is not can be, it is extremely beneficial. But the right tests are what really give people the answers that they're looking for.
And this is where I'll go back to our original topic on the fatty acids,
Yes.
because the effect of seed oils, and this
Hmm.
is you know, this is something that's people are learning about. RFK Jr. is really promoting this. But in practice, when you start testing people and you see the effect of the seed oils, how these rancid oils are making their cells literally explode all over and
Yeah.
creating tremendous inflammation, and how they can't necessarily detoxify very easily from these oils. It's something to see. It really
Yeah,
is.
so I've been, I started reading and then I had babies, so I haven't finished it, but I started reading a book called Dark Calories, which is all
Hmm.
about seed oils and the research around them that's not well known because they're not necessarily in the nutrition science, they're in other sciences like
Hmm.
bioengineering and it things like that. Super, super interesting. I listened to like this 3 hour long podcast by the author, and then I got the book and I was listening to it. And what's interesting is seeing all of one of my favorite things to do. I use Instagram to kind of see what science is coming out. I follow researchers, and then
Hmm.
I look at the comments, and the comments are always like super divisive, of course. But people talk like, "Oh, seed oils are healthy. They're, you know, I know, and there's no science saying that they're harmful to health." Which I'm like, okay, you're being a little bit like that's not, there's always science in support and denial of each, but it's like the science is there, you're seeing it. I can't wait to see, as the years go on, more and more that comes out about it. But I also think a lot of it's going to be suppressed because of the big
The
food.
money.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
the money.
money. So, seed oils. Like one of the things that I learned was that our body stores them in our fat cells, but it can
Hmm.
take up to 18 months of avoiding seed oils for our body to be able to actually detox them out
Well, we can
the
speed that
body.
up. We have
Okay.
technique, we have technology to speed that up, but you're essentially right. That's true.
So let's dive into that a little bit because so my cousin, it's so interesting. My cousin, she and I are the opposites. I do better on a higher protein, higher fat. She does better on more of a vegetarian. She doesn't process fat very well.
Hmm.
And she was a vegetarian vegan for over a decade, right? And so she is now at the point where she's minimizing seed oils significantly, but the detoxification has been very slow for her. So the effects have been seeing her health improve has been a very slow process. So I would love to hear how we could speed that up.
Okay, one of the basic ways is make sure you have good liver thyroid function.
She's dealing with those issues
Okay,
specifically. Yep.
so if you have good liver and thyroid function, that helps speed that up. Then there are different nutrients that you can take. The most important are all the essential fatty acids, the omegas, the EPA, the DHA, linolenic acid, all the good fatty acids get tested, find out what you're low in,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get a fatty acid program because the body will tend to want to exchange the bad fats for the good fats.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, it has that innate knowledge where it will try to do that. There are certain nutrients that help speed that up. Vanadium, chromium, and niacin, which is the
Okay.
trivalent factor. That
Yeah.
does, especially the niacin helps in that exchange.
So,
It's
IV therapy is pretty popular here in Phoenix specifically, and niacin IVs are one of those ones that get pushed, but people
oh
find
wait,
they get really hot and
well
flushed.
they flush. They get the niacin, the
Yeah.
famous niacin flush.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is
Is
harmless.
okay. So I
No, the
think that
niacin
it
flush is
freaks people
harmless.
out.
Well, what's happening when you get the niacin flush, niacin does two things. It releases histamine from your tissues, and it
Okay.
also releases stored radiation from your cells.
Ooh,
So,
okay.
so the people who tend to get hit with the niacin flush the hardest are the people who fly a lot, who are in the business. They're the airline pilots, stewardesses, or people who just fly a lot because they get hit with a lot of radiation being up there
Hmm.
in a plane.
Right.
But nonetheless, that is what's happening. You're releasing radiation. And if you do it and you watch carefully enough, you'll actually see women will suddenly show bikini straps from prior
Oh,
sunburns.
interesting.
Yeah, you'll
Huh.
see it actually will come out from prior sunburns will run out from taking the niacin. But
Interesting.
yeah, but of course, but the niacin though is very important to speed up that exchange. So if the person gets on the right fatty acids, they take chromium, vanadium, niacin, and they have good liver and thyroid function, you can probably speed that up by half, the detoxification
That's
of
significant.
the. Mhm.
I mean, it's still slow when people are
Yes.
used to taking antibiotics and feeling better in 24 hours, right?
Hmm.
In 10-day protocols, but that's huge. Oh, interesting. So if somebody wanted to start emphasizing or making sure that they're getting essential fatty acids from diet and maybe supplements, would supplements be a good idea? Because a lot of people love to they think more is better, right?
Hmm.
And so, if just for the general person who's like listening to this, maybe they just are they're like, oh, like I really want to make sure I'm getting enough essential fatty acids. Where would you, on their way to getting tested? I think, of course, we want people to know exactly what's going on and not guess. But if they just were like, if they want to just make sure they're getting essential fatty acids from diet, where would they begin?
Here is the dilemma because it's amazing how many people we've tested so far who are real health food people who had
Yeah,
some of the worst scores I've ever seen.
of course.
And why is that? Well, it's because the fatty acids that there's a particular um, pitfall with fatty acids where they go rancid.
Right.
And it's even true with olive oil.
Hmm.
People who are staunch, into the benefits of olive oil, a lot of the olive oil that people might consume is rancid, which is not doing
Yeah.
you any good. It's doing you harm. And it's the
Right.
same thing. The same thing is true with foods that are high in essential fatty acids. The foods that are high in essential fatty acids, if you were to think about it just casually, the first thing would be nuts and seeds, fatty fish, avocado, things like that. They're high in the good fats. But if you don't eat them or prepare them correctly, they could be rancid, and especially true with nuts and seeds. The oils in there can go rancid after a time. And with
Right.
supplements, the same thing is true.
Yeah.
Even if you go and you buy Hain oil in the health food store, it could possibly go rancid. So when you're consuming an oil, oil check, first thing you do is, does this burn me? When it's going down your throat or in your mouth, if it burns or if you have the slightest inkling that it's burning, it's probably rancid and throw it out
Hmm.
because it's going to do you harm.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, supplement companies, not all of them, but a lot of them that make encapsulated oils, they're not on top of this. And people don't always look at the expiration date, and sometimes the expiration date doesn't even make a difference. They're already rancid by the time they were putting them
Yeah,
on
it's
on the
storage,
shelf.
storage,
Yeah,
transportation,
yeah,
all of that. Yeah, I'm a big fan of really the ones that you can only get through like naturopathic doctors and things like that. Companies that are third party tested on a regular basis.
yeah, which is not available to everybody.
Right. It's really unfortunate, but they're available. It's just it takes some searching, and I find like here in Phoenix or here in Arizona, we're like what's considered a green state. So, we have a naturopathic school. Naturopathic doctors are seen as naturopathic medical doctors.
Hmm.
Family practice, basically they're not surgical, but they can do basically family practice and specialize beyond that. And I feel very lucky, but I work with people all over the country. And if you're in Ohio or, the Midwest or some states in the South, like you don't have access. Naturopathic doctors are basically health coaches and they can't practice medicine. They can't do, they can't order testing and things like that. And so I find that the people in these red states really struggle with being able to get to the testing and the supplements and things that would actually really benefit them.
Yeah, Arizona was one of the last holdouts for naturopathic doctors.
Right.
Connecticut is a good state for naturopaths. Chiropractors can deliver babies in Connecticut.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, but anyway, but you're right. There's we still have a shortage, and hopefully the well is going to fill up as time goes by. Now that we have better direction going on from the
Yeah.
federal government as far as these things.
Yep. I agree. So, thinking about nuts and things like that, just again, because people are going to want some solid direction. Where's a good place to buy nuts? Is there like
I
a
would have to,
specific company or
that's a good question. I'd have to imagine the health food store would be the better place.
yeah,
I would have to imagine that. But there are signs, there are things to look at on the food itself. Like, if they, like when you look at sunflower seeds, if the sunflower seeds are starting to go orange, they're rancid.
right.
You can
Those
taste it.
taste awful. Yeah,
Yeah,
they taste
yeah.
awful.
So any nut or seed that tastes awful,
Yeah,
pretty
just
good.
don't eat it.
Right. Pretty good. Yeah, that's
It's what's amazing to me, because I'm on the very practical side of it, being a health coach, is people who are trying to be healthy, and especially those who are really new to it, they kind of expect health food to taste gross. So they don't think anything of
mm,
like a nut that tastes really bitter or stale. Like they're like, oh, I guess that's just what they taste like.
yeah.
And what I'm always trying to tell people is healthy food tastes good. And if it doesn't
When it's
taste good,
fresh,
it's probably not
not good.
fresh. Yeah.
Yeah. There's
Um,
one doctor I know who advocates people getting their own fresh nuts and seeds and making their own fresh nut and seed butters. And he advises them to put a small amount of ascorbic acid and vitamin E in their homemade stuff to preserve it longer, to stop it from
uh-huh.
going rancid. So that's where additives, like when you see vitamin E or ascorbic acid being added to food, that's where it's a good thing because it's preventing it from going rancid too fast.
Right. Yeah, I think this is I'm gonna have to do a podcast on this, but I'm getting really, really frustrated with, and I think it's just social media and like fast consumption culture where they push a purist mentality
Mhm.
and all chemicals are bad or like it's just
Right,
very purist, right?
right,
And it's unfortunately nuance is not very popular, right? It doesn't get you
right.
followers and likes and things like that, and people I think get really frustrated with nuance, but it's really kind of easy. It's supposed to taste good.
Well,
you
that's
know
here's the biggest example I learned personally was coffee.
okay.
Like growing up as I did in the health food industry or the health food persona, coffee
Yeah,
was evil.
yeah,
And now we have studies that show that coffee has certain antioxidants in there. Women who drink coffee actually have a significantly lower rate of breast cancer and uterine cancer because of the fact that the coffee helps them detoxify estrogens. So
Yeah.
it's not always the stigma of things is not always what it appears. That's where science has to be, and where you have to have an open mind to look at things. Just
Yeah.
because it's not on the shelf in the health food store, it doesn't mean that this is bad.
Yeah, it's so funny because this science coming out around coffee makes me so glad I never stopped drinking it for too long.
Hmm.
Like I always tried and then I would just miss it. And I was like, I like the flavor. I mean, obviously I try to get stuff that's not hasn't been out in the sun getting moldy and
Right.
things like that. Also I don't drink bitter tasting, super bitter, kind of gross, stale tasting coffee. Like I think of my grandma drinking up my grandma drank Folgers, right? A little.
Hmm.
And so it's, yeah, I know.
Interesting meme about Teddy Roosevelt I saw the other
Okay.
day on Instagram. Explained that at 5 years old, Teddy Roosevelt had bad asthma, and they didn't have really any asthma medication, so the doctor prescribed coffee. And he
Yeah.
drank 5 cups of coffee a day, got rid of his asthma. And then before you know it, as an adult, he was drinking maybe 40 cups, 50 cups of coffee per day.
Yeah.
And anyone who studied Teddy Roosevelt and his activity level, well, it makes sense that I mean,
Yeah.
the man was amazing.
So growing up, I had severe asthma. And I remember the doctor talking to my mom, like, if she's taking her inhalers and she's still struggling, give her coffee.
Hmm.
And I remember seeing like commercials about it and like, I remember this little girl like having an asthma attack and they gave her a cup of coffee and she drank it and it like calmed it down.
It was in Back to Eden.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
the probably one of the original books on natural healing was Back to Eden, and it
Yes, yeah,
was in
yeah.
it was in Back to Eden about coffee and that some of its attributes.
Yeah, it's so interesting. But yeah, the purist mentality I think is really frustrating, but also this American approach of more is better.
Hmm.
And but also, why would I spend $60 on this, fresher fish oil versus what I can get at Costco,
Right,
and
which
and
might have
it's
mercury in it, which is
all
the other.
kinds of crap. It might not even be
Yeah,
fish oil. Like,
yeah.
it might be more like sunflower seed oil or something versus fish oil. And people I find it's just like you invest strategically, right? You don't want to be spending $600 a month on supplements
Mhm.
unnecessarily, which again, where testing is such a helpful tool because then you're able to invest strategically and correctly, and what you spend your money on, you can, get the third party verified and all of that to make sure you're actually getting what they say you're getting.
Mhm.
So, I think your approach of test don't guess is a really solid approach. I fall into that as well. What I find is I work with naturopathic doctors all over the country, and there's some that don't like to test. They're like, well, let's just, change your diet first and, remove some environmental toxins and see what happens. And, but people typically go to a naturopathic doctor because they're sick and allopathic medicine has failed them. And that's where I'm
Mhm.
like, why wouldn't you take advantage of the tests available to be strategic, to find
Well,
those deficiencies? And
I personally feel that what I really practice is clinical ecology.
yeah,
And in practicing and having that viewpoint of practicing clinical ecology, testing becomes really important.
yeah,
We could go through case history after case history of people who came to me who had all of these crazy, you could say mysterious symptoms that we weren't able to understand until we actually tested them for toxic metals and toxic chemicals. And then
mm-hmm,
it became apparent. And one of the things I learned from there is that these elements don't go away, unfortunately. Our
right,
bodies are not good enough in terms of detoxification in this current world and environment where we can get rid of these toxins fast enough on our own. So you have to test and you have to determine what the toxins are that the person has, and then put them on a program of different substances which will draw those toxins out and assist them in getting rid of it. And if
right.
you don't do that, the person's situation is not going to change.
Yep. I think you and I talked about that on another one, and I that has been true in my experience with my clients is like, especially when it comes to environmental toxins, like a lot of times when you've tried the diet and you've tried the supplements and they're still not getting better, that has always been the missing piece
Hmm.
every single time.
Yep.
And one of the things I went to this workshop late last year with a local oncology practice, integrative oncologist. And what he had found in his practice is he can get the level of toxins down temporarily, but then they go back up because of living life. Like there's stuff that's sprayed on food, people travel,
Right.
people are, in cities with car exhaust and all of that. And so it's really helping the body, unclog and keep unclogged the detox pathways.
Right.
I think where people get really frustrated is they're like, I tested really high, I got it low, but then it keeps climbing back up and it like bounces. And it's like, well, that makes sense, right? But you want to get to a point where you're eating in a way and then having maybe practices in a way that regularly keep the detox pathways unclogged because we live in a world. And so there's
Hmm.
stuff everywhere. And I think people, again, it's that purist mentality or that one and done. Okay, I got them low. They're never going to get high again. My body's fixed. And people get frustrated
It's
that light health is is part
it's
of
a process.
it's a well, and it's something that
People
you
think it's an
never
achievement.
done. Yeah.
They think it's an achievement. It's not an achievement. You don't achieve it and then you get the gold medal and you get to go home and it's all over.
Right.
It's a process that's occurring
Yes.
that you have to maintain the process. But luckily, I've been able to isolate certain things that answer some of these questions. Mold in your house is going to be one of the things that continues to make the person toxic. Well
Yeah.
water
Yep.
is another source of continual toxicity that people may run into. Those are the two most common sources I find where people are getting continually contaminated. It's
Yeah.
having mold in their house and then having water that's from a well, and the well water tends to be very high in iron and copper and some other elements. Manganese
Mhm.
is another thing that's really high in well water, which continues to uh, make the person toxic and gets them into that spin. There's some other things too, occupationally. You have to look at hairdressers
Mhm.
because they're exposed to those sprays all the time. There's tons of chemicals they're exposed to. They continually become toxic. Even when you detoxify them, they can get
Yeah.
toxic again due to that. So there are certain environments and certain work conditions that you really got to be careful of. It's specialized, but it they continue to come up in the same loop you're talking about.
Yeah. And and like you said, it's a process. It's just health is a lifestyle. It's not a destination to
Yes,
achieve or a goal, a finish line. The finish line is dying.
right.
And a lot of people think it's about extending your lifespan, which I mean, obviously many people want to live as long as possible, but I want to live as long as possible as well as possible.
Hmm.
Like I want my days to be able to have energy, to be able to have mental clarity, to be able to keep up with my kids and my grandkids when they come and my friends and being able to like live life vibrantly and not just putter out and die off, getting ill and my quality of life declining over time. I want to live well until my heart stops. My great grandmother, she was that way. She was still walking a mile every single morning at 97. She walked her mile, she took her shower, she ate breakfast, and then her heart stopped and she was gone.
Well,
But she up until her 80s, she was walking 10 miles a day.
well,
And then it just got less over time because she got older, but she was 97. She didn't have a walker. She
oh,
was,
jeez, that's great.
like she was doing great, and it's like that is absolutely possible. You just don't stop, you
Carlton
know?
Fredericks, I don't know if you remember him.
Mm-mm.
Carlton Fredericks was a nutritionist, very famous in the New York area. He had a radio show in New York for years,
Mm-hmm.
maybe 25, 30 years. And he had a degree in public health and became interested in nutrition. And he was the first one really to promote the low carb diet and the evils of sugar, especially the
I
evils of
do know
sugar
him.
on children
Yes.
and children,
Mm-hmm.
right? And he used to talk about the definition of health from two viewpoints. medical profession's definition of health was the absence of any major disease, where the nutritionist's definition of health was more like your grandmother.
Yeah. Yep. And I think that the absence of disease, I think what gets so frustrating for those who are, dealing with chronic symptoms is their labs are not bad enough for them to
Hmm.
be diagnosed with anything, but they
Right?
feel awful and they're frustrated. And then to be told what you eat really doesn't matter.
You know,
Yeah, I know. Terrible, terrible advice.
this
Which
this is where we came up with the definitions or the terms of clinical versus subclinical.
correct. Yep. And I don't even think doctors know what is optimal versus what is suboptimal. They just know if you're in this range, you're free of disease, quote unquote. And it's not like, oh, well, your thyroid stuff is starting to get a little bit low. Let's maybe look at some, micronutrients and some minerals and see what's going on. And, it's like there's so much prevention out there to not be clinical. Like, I'm actually, after my third daughter was born, about 5 months after, I gained 11 pounds in a month. And I was like, what is happening? Got my thyroid tested. It was like 2.8. Like, it was bad. And so, and I know it was probably from, I had a copper IUD,
Well, there you go.
for 8 years. I was on birth control in my late teens, early 20s. Then I was a single mom with 2 to 3 jobs and super stressed for 14 years. And like all of that stuff combined. And I didn't know what I didn't know until after I got sick and then started learning more. And I think that that's what is so frustrating for people. But again, it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna go get my micronutrients tested. Maybe if I'm imbalanced somewhere, I don't have to be taking 120 milligrams of thyroid and P. Maybe I can back that off. And then, but also, again, I want to be vibrant. I want to feel good. I do feel good now that I'm on thyroid medication in the proper dose. I feel great. And I'm 6 months, almost 7 months pregnant now. And it's been a very easy pregnancy for me
Mhm.
compared to my third. My third, I slept like 16 hours a day. And like, if I walked 10 minutes, I was ready to take a 2 hour long nap. So I was struggling, and there's so many people that are in that place where the labs are in the normal range, but there's something wrong, until you crash and then you become clinical.
A lot of the people should check out the work of Weston Childs.
I love Weston
Yeah,
Childs.
he has a lot of good information on thyroid and also for testing. Unfortunately, he's not taking patients anymore, but he has a lot
Yeah.
of good information on testing. And if anyone's interested, they can contact me, and I will send them an article expose I wrote on thyroid, which is a combination of all the major work that's been done on thyroid, including Dr. Childs, Dr. Um, my friend from the Trace Elements, Dr. Watts, and many people, because when you're looking at thyroid, there's a combination of things you have to look at. You have to look at blood work, but it's not always the blood work you think it is. A lot of doctors don't test for things like fasting insulin, which can affect your thyroid dramatically. They don't test leptin levels. They don't look at reverse T3, even though you would think maybe you and I think they should, but they
Right.
don't look at reverse T3. Some of them don't even look at T3. So
Correct.
a lot of these, and then cortisol is another major thing you have to test for when you're looking at thyroid because of how cortisol downregulates thyroid. So sometimes the answer is not in the thyroid blood test, it's in other tests or other substances which affect thyroid. Then you have what we talked about earlier, the parasympathetic versus the sympathetic, and that balance of all those trace elements that affect your thyroid hormones. And then we have another interesting thing that comes from Dr. Eric Rind, which is your body temperature.
Hmm.
Your body temperature is probably the least expensive, most reliable way to understand your thyroid function because the whole purpose of your thyroid gland is to make energy and heat. So if your body temperature is not where it should be, it's telling you your thyroid is off. Now, it's not telling you what about your thyroid is off, but at least you know it's off and you can start reverse engineering to find out why.
Yeah.
And
So
then we
my
go
body
back to,
temperature
yeah,
growing up until I got on thyroid meds was in the 97s, like the low 97s, my
okay, so
entire
that's not
life.
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not good.
But so is my dad's. And so we're like, oh, it's genetic. Well, yes, it's genetic, but with the same,
Right.
maybe, genetic. blocks or tendencies or lack of
Hmm.
enzymes or, whatever's needed for conversion.
Right.
Um, but yeah, like what was so interesting to me was when I finally got on the proper dose was my body temperature actually is at 98.6, and it's so weird
Oh my
to
God.
me. Like it's so like I'm like I've always been in the 97s. The other thing that's happened is I used to have extremely low blood pressure, like naturally, just all the
Right.
time. Like I remember I went to the urgent care for a sinus infection back when I didn't have insurance. I had like, insurance that only covered a certain amount. And they wouldn't let me leave until my blood pressure went up. And I was like, I always have this low blood pressure, but it's
Right.
more regulated now. It's
That's an
more in that.
attribute again of the parasympathetic dominant. They have low blood pressure compared to the sympathetic, who tends to be high. So that makes
Yeah.
perfect sense. That correlates. Your low body temperature and low blood pressure correlate.
Yeah. So it's so interesting. I love talking to you because you're just so in it and it's so fascinating. And you're on the cutting edge of it. You're not, you're on the forefront of the research and it's just so cool.
And it's interesting, going back to the fatty acids again, that we found the certain fatty acids are really essential to your thyroid function and your body's ability to utilize thyroid hormone. And didn't expect to come up with that and find that, but it's sometimes the missing piece in the person who's almost there but doesn't get quite there.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Well, thank you again so much for your time. If people want to reach out to you and maybe get that paper you were talking about or, consult with you, how would they do that?
They can find me easily on the web. They can find me at my main website, health-truth.com. My two subsidiary websites, the New York City Thyroid Doctor and the New York City Candida Doctor, or they can look me up on social media. And all they have to do is email me, and I'll be happy to send them that data on the thyroid.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Biamonte. I have enjoyed our conversation just as much as I always
Always,
do.
yep, always, I
And it's so
agree.
good to see you.
You too.
If you are looking for a practical, realistic, delicious, and simple way to eat healthy, lower your inflammation, and increase your intake of essential fatty acids while minimizing the intake of harmful fatty acids, I would love for you to take advantage of my healthy eating meal plan program. It is where we upgrade your baseline to be just what a normal healthy diet should look like. When you are eating well, it clears the smoke to find the fire, so to speak. Testing is more accurate, supplements are more effective, medication is more effective, and you're able to feel better and stay feeling better much more quickly. And if you are in need of a therapeutic diet for things like candida, post-SIBO gut recovery, mold toxicity, histamine intolerance, food sensitivities, and others, I've got you covered. I can help you transition onto and then at the appropriate time off of a therapeutic diet and back onto a healthy diet full of variety that works with what's going on in your life and in your body. You can learn more by clicking on the links in the show notes. I would love to partner with you and help you feel your absolute best. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you found this episode helpful, would you do me a favor and help others find it by leaving a review, sharing a screenshot on social media, or sharing the link with a friend? By you sharing what you've learned, others are able to find this podcast and join our community. Be sure to check out my website, www.roadtolivinghole.com, for over 160 delicious recipes, a variety of meal plans, and a blog packed full of even more healthy living tips. If you'd like to learn more about how to work with me as your coach, you can schedule a free consult through www.roadtolivinghole.com/health-coaching/. Until next time, friend. Bye.